Welcome back. Now, South Africa's relations with the U.S. are in the spotlight as U.S. President Donald Trump plans to cut funding to the nation, citing land expropriation laws. President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for further engagement with the U.S. over the details of the Expropriation Act. This comes as South Africa readies to chair and host the 2025 G20 summit. Today, President of the American Chamber of Commerce in South Africa, Kuseni Dlamini, joins us to explore the U.S.'s scrutiny of SA's land policies. Thank you so much for your time, Kuseni. Now, just, obviously the timing of this is quite interesting, and I guess quite apt, looking at the fact that Donald Trump has recently been inaugurated. But just looking at the history of this, expropriation policy, was this a long time coming?
So that's a great point to start on, Zinati, in the sense that this is actually an expropriation act of 1975. It was there before 1994, and obviously the imperatives post-1994 are around the redress of the inequities of the past. So you're right. It has been a long time in coming. It should not be a surprise. It has been debated quite extensively. There's been lots of consultations, and the need to make sure that it is aligned to the South African Constitution has been realized and acknowledged by all stakeholders. And I think from a business perspective, it is really important to make sure that we have an environment that provides policy predictability and certainty so that investors can comfortably know that this is the best place in which to invest. What is important to note is that President Ramaphosa has made it very clear that this is not a confiscation instrument, but a legally mandated process to make sure that there is access to publicly required land or access to land by the public using just and equitable means in line with the South African Constitution. We know that the Constitution of South Africa protects private property, and it's reassuring that the private property clause in the Constitution is still entrenched and is not being tinkered with as a result of this process. And then the question arises, why are we where we are? I think we are where we are because of two main reasons, in my opinion. Maybe the communication and explanation around this act from our authorities could have been better and could be better. But the second reason is that there are elements that have succeeded in misinforming the international community on exactly what this entails. Because as you and I know, there's nobody since this act was signed by the president who is worried that their land is going to be taken, or there are people running around going to do a land grab as we saw next door. So I think South Africa remains very committed, as indeed it must, to its constitutional democracy, private property, and indeed respecting property rights in particular. And that's the messaging that is very important from an investment point of view in the context of South Africa. If we look at the US business community in this country, we've got over 600 US corporations investing in South Africa that create over 200,000 jobs. And combined, US companies almost account for about 10% of South Africa's GDP. So it's a very important strategic economic relationship with the US. And it's one that we need to work day in and day out, rather, to make sure that it is entrenched, it is protected, and that it is deepened. Because if that happens, we can be able to reduce unemployment, reduce poverty, reduce the inequalities, and above all, grow the economy and indeed attract more investors to come to South Africa. I don't think it's in the national economic interest of South Africa not to be understood in the White House in terms of what we're doing from a policy point of view. I think this is an opportunity for me to turn what appears to be a negative into a positive by engaging that much more, connecting that much more, and communicating better with all stakeholders in the US, in Europe, in Southeast Asia, the Far East, and across the world, or even with domestic investors, because also we have to realize the importance of domestic investment. We cannot hope that our problems will be sorted out by foreigners if we do not invest in our own country ourselves.
Yeah. Well, Kuseni, it's quite interesting because it feels like this is wrapped up in miscommunication. Looking at the history of this and also the fact that it is constitutionally mandated, it would seem that the aim and the process, the intention and the process of the Expropriation Act has really been twisted in misunderstanding, misinterpretation, and frankly, lies. But for a whole president of a country to talk about it on social media, to just, blurt out things that don't really align with the intention of the process of the Expropriation Act, could that then not signal an undermining then of the diplomatic relationship that South Africa has with the US?
To me, Zinati, it signals an opportunity to look at how do we strengthen the bilateral relationship between Washington and Pretoria. How do we reach out to President Trump's administration? How do we reach out to the Republicans who are now in charge of the US administration? And how do we broaden the network of supporters for South Africa across Washington and across the US? And also, more importantly, how do we engage with the business community in the US and in South Africa, and civil society, opinion leaders and opinion formers? How do we strengthen our embassy in Washington, D.C.? We've got Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, who's hit the ground running, who's very familiar with the U.S. environment. He was there before, and I have no doubt he's doing a good job in terms of messaging the South African perspective on this matter and making sure that it is well understood. All what is required from a business community point of view is how can we creatively and positively reinforce those efforts to make sure that we are understood. And Trump has shown himself to be a president, especially this time, Trump 201, is a more transactional presidency than anything else. It's all about America first. What do I get from you? If I give you X, what do you give me? What do I get in return? And again, we have to be able to articulate exactly what exactly are we giving in this relationship that is important, that is strategic with the US. And we are giving a lot. There's a lot that South Africa gives to the US in terms of investment opportunities for US companies here, and also South African companies that have invested in the US, that are creating jobs, contributing to economic growth in the US, and also improving livelihoods in that country. So it's not like an underdog, top dog relationship. We have a lot to offer. We need to articulate it. We need to clarify it. We need to unpack it. And of course, we've got a lot to gain from the US. Let's not forget, it's the largest economy in the world, technologically advanced. And it brings in technology here. Our members in the American Chamber of Commerce, they bring in technology, they bring in capital, they bring in skills, they bring in a lot of supply chain opportunities for local players in the South African market. Ultimately, it's a positive sum game. It's a win-win relationship, but we need to take charge of it. We need to be able to articulate our contribution to this relationship.
Yeah. At this point, does it seem that there is no distinction between a kind of diplomatic issue with trade? Because obviously at this point, it just seems to be a high-level diplomatic issue where Trump has threatened aid. But I mean, just looking at, the conversations that business leaders are having, could we find that that could filter through to the trade relationship that the U.S. has with South Africa?
Yeah, Zinati, diplomacy and trade at a certain level, especially if you look at them from the prism of economic diplomacy, they're actually inextricably intertwined. You need to get one right in order for the other one to be right. So we cannot run away from that. So we need to manage this relationship in a holistic way, and we need a whole of society efforts to make sure that we build meaningful partnerships that demonstrate value to the Americans. And also, we also need to make sure that we get our fair share from the relationship with the Americans. It should not be a relationship where one party wins more than the other. It must be a win-win, positive sum game for it to be sustainable and for it to be underpinned and anchored in respect. And that's what is important. And what we're seeing now with the global trade wars that have been unleashed since the inauguration of President Trump is a situation where he says, I'm looking at my trade relationship with country X, but country X is benefiting more than I am, more than my people, more than the US is benefiting. Why should that be the case? And how do we level the playing field? And I think we need to be very proactive and activist as well from a South African point of view. Look at all the trade relationships that we have. Are they benefiting the ordinary people of South Africa? Are they benefiting taxpayers? And how can we make sure that they are beneficial to our economy, to our global competitiveness, to our ability to attract foreign direct investment into our shores so that we can grow the economy? Are we able to encourage companies to manufacture in South Africa instead of just exporting goods into this country? We saw with the COVID-19 pandemic that Africa imports most of its healthcare products. I mean, only 1% of vaccines, for example, are manufactured in Africa. The rest are imported. Are we not now having an opportunity to say, let's get the global players, whether in all sectors, whether it's telco, it's mining, software, technology, to set up shop in South Africa, employ South Africans, capacitate South Africans to be able to produce world-class goods for export to the world that comprises 8.4 billion people, unlike focusing on our small market of 65 million people.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that these engagements lead to a sum of 2 + 2 = 4, not of 3 + 1 = 4. All parties need to benefit from this kind of transactional relationship. But thank you so much for your time and for your insights, and all the best with the engagements that you do have with the US.
Bye.
Well, that was Kuseni Dlamini, President of the American Chamber of Commerce in South Africa.